So we're going to look at English pedagogy training. We'll start with the basics of what pedagogy is. And as I introduced myself, I am focused more on competency oriented pedagogy. So we will also look at what competencies are, what are learning outcomes. I'm sure we all know all these basic things and we all have used it in our day to day teaching classes, but we will dwell more in it and figure out or learn how competency skills can be embedded in our learning outcomes and our daily teaching learning activities. So today we're going to look at more on that, and we will also look at how the thinking skills of students can be improvised to some extent. Uh, as of now, we generally ask questions of what and where and when, more of lower order thinking skills. So in this session, we will also look at how we can encourage or motivate children to answer higher order thinking skills. So these are the two major aspects that we will be looking in today's session. And today's session, we will also have breakout room activities. If we can, we will also do that so that you get to know your other participants well, and there will be better interaction. So starting with today's session, certain protocols for learning together. This is a generic thing that I would like to say before we start the session. How can we ensure that everybody has the best chance of learning? Always be empathetic and considerate to your parents when we, especially during breakout room activities, ensure that all of us get an opportunity to speak. Be thoughtful of how much time you spend in speaking and allow another encourage others as well to participate. You can also ask questions and make comments. You can and please, as Usha ma'am said, I request you all to have your videos on, so that we as the teachers, all of us, know who we are talking to, and it definitely, with the video on, will develop a better bond. So I request all of you to have your videos on. You can ask questions and make comments silently using the chat feature, or you also have the raise hand button. You can use that at any point of the session to interact with others. You will be working in breakout rooms, so get ready to be sociable and have your camera and microphone switched on. Next, mute your mic whenever you're not speaking. Ensure that there is no background noise. Use the gallery option to see everyone. These are certain things that you all are aware of. Switch on your camera for all activities. This will help to develop a professional bond among all participants. And this is again a very important thing. Ensure that you close all unnecessary or unwanted applications during the session, because breakout rooms definitely take a lot of bandwidth. And if you can close the other applications, it will be easy to be in the meeting. And if you want to speak, you can use the raise hand, or you can always use the chat window to ask questions and clarify doubts. Now let's quickly get into the program overview. So I'm going to be here with you all for 4 days. The first 4 days. Day one, the agenda is to learning pedagogy, how to develop students' thinking skills, higher order thinking skills to be precise, as I told you. And also, we'll be looking at the various opportunities that we have within a lesson to develop higher order thinking skill questions. How do we create test items? How do we create questions to influence children in HOT based answering questions? Because CBSE now, according to the new education policy, is moving more towards analysis, application, and creation than simple rote learning. CBSE doesn't completely rule out rote learning based questions, but the focus is more towards higher order like analysis, application, creation than mere rote learning. So we're going to look at also ways in which we can encourage students to answer such questions, and to make students answer these questions, we as teachers have to be clear on what sort of questions we pose to students. That's extremely important. And that following that, day two, we'll be moving on to assessment for learning, AFL. What is assessment for learning? There are three kinds of assessments: assessment for learning, off learning, and to learning. So we'll be focusing more on assessment for learning on day two, and the various AFL tools. AFL is nothing but assessment for learning. The various tools we use in our teaching learning activities on a daily basis. The last 2 days will be focusing more on lesson plans. So day 3, you'll be analyzing and designing lesson plans integrated with the required learning outcomes and competencies. Day 4 also will be a continuation of the creation and designing of lesson plans. There will be a lot of peer review. There will be a lot of breakout room group activities. So please be open to participate in all these things. So this is our agenda in a nutshell. Can I move on to the next slide? Yeah. All right. So objectives for day 1, to get an overview of the pedagogical enhancements with the introduction of competency-based education. Pedagogy is nothing but, as we all know, the teaching learning process, the skills, the teaching skills that we all as teachers should possess. We all of us know what to teach because we're all seasoned teachers. I'm sure the participants over here are also seasoned teachers, but how is something that has changed. The perspective, the paradigm of CBSE and NEP, everything has changed. So how is what we're going to focus, because what we all know. So it is how that we're going to focus in today's session as well as the upcoming sessions. To so how do I enhance my pedagogical uh, aspects with the introduction of CBE or competency based education. I will also understand the students need opportunities to develop higher order thinking skills. It's not something that they are born with. We need to train them. We need to fine tune their higher order thinking skills. So, what are the opportunities that we need to give to students to do that? And we also need to identify specific opportunities in our lessons, in our daily lessons, be it Nelson Mandela, The Long Walk to Freedom, or Fire and Ice poem by Robert Frost. Whatever it is that we take, a simple lesson that we take, how do I develop or how do I find opportunities to ask questions? Test items over here are nothing but our questions. How do I put forth these questions in such a way that my students analyze, interpret, rather than just picking and dropping the answer from the textbook? We will also be looking at those things. And when such a change happens, change always comes with a little bit of constraint, or it always has its own challenges. When we change the entire perspective, we are sure to face obstacles and challenges. So we're going to also discuss on some ground uh, practical, ground level challenges in implementing these changes, and also solutions to overcome the set challenges. When we had an obstacle, we are sure to have solutions. And as teachers, nobody else can know better than you how to find a solution to any challenge. So we're going to look at these today in today's session. Now, coming to how does CBE describe competency-based education? I remember yesterday I had shared a pre-reading material, two materials with you all. One was the agenda that CBSE had given on competency-based education and what are the various expectations of CBSE on different levels. That was one thing that I had shared with you all. And the other one was, I think, Bloom's taxonomy. Yes, I had shared a document in Bloom's taxonomy. So I hope you had gone through it. The next 3 or 4 slides are going to just give you a brief overview of the document that I had shared with you yesterday. So how does CB, what is competency based education? Now, when we are going to say that, all right, CBSE is expecting this entire perspective change, a paradigm change from simple, straightforward questions to competency based questions in education. What exactly is this? What is it? Why is CBSE expecting this? So as always, it is always student oriented, child centric. It's always student oriented, and that is exactly why CBSE is moving towards competency based education. To follow a more practical and professional approach, where first of all, predefined real life based application oriented competencies are defined. So when I say competencies, my competencies must be measurable, something that I can see. Competencies are nothing but my life skills, and the important LSRW skills that we say in English. How good is my student in listening capability? How good is my student in speaking, public speaking? How good is my student in expressing himself or herself through writing? Or how good is he or she in reading? So these LSRW skills form my basics of competencies. So CBSE says this is what we're going to focus on. And to ensure attainment of these competencies through precise, measurable learning outcomes. My LOs must be, or learning outcomes must be tangible, measurable. And then to go beyond mere accumulation of knowledge from textbooks and tests to enable students to practice acquired competencies in their daily life. Like I said, competency is nothing but my life skills. We teachers have to train our students not just to score marks, but also to face life. So it's education is not just about marks. Yes, marks are important. I'm not going to deny that. Absolutely, marks are important, but there is something beyond marks that define the success of a student. So when he goes out into a college, many excellent colleges, if you notice, don't just look at the mark list, but they also say what else have you participated in, what are the extracurricular activities that you have participated in or achieved. So this is what competency is. Competency is just not marks or just not the knowledge that a child acquires from textbooks. CBSE says that is our objective as the teaching fraternity. That should be our objective. How should my content be? Now that I know my objective, how do I tweak my content? My content should define the competencies to be attained after a certain time interval in which a specific part of the curriculum has been covered. For example, after term 1, or after say 1 month of completing few chapters or exercises. What competency exactly is my child gaining? Competency over here refers to life skills. So what is it that my child is gaining? That is something that my content should focus on. It is contrary. The content for competency based education is not like the traditional learning approach, which keeps increasing the content by following the inconsistent principle that the greater the content, greater the achievement of students. This ideology is something that CBSE says, no, cut it out. That's not the ideology that we're going to, that's not the approach we're going to take. CBSE says, no, it's not true that the higher the content, I complete all the exercises of all the chapters in the entire textbook and my child is good to go. No, that's not the way you define the achievement of a student, CBSE says. And how do I change my pedagogy is nothing but teaching learning activities that we have as teachers in the classroom. So I know my objective. I know how my textbook content should be or my content for teaching should be. Now, how do I teach? Pedagogy is actually the how. Answers the question how. As a teacher, what should I do? How am I supposed to carry forward the competency based education? So pedagogical processes are child centric. So long it has always been a classroom was teacher centric. We stand in the middle of the classroom, the students surround us, we give them a topic, we write it on the board, we tell them this is what we're going to learn today, and then we start the discussion, we talk to them, and we try to get some answers from them, and then we discuss the lesson, we give them the notes. This is the a basic classroom scenario that we have throughout all these years. But then CBSE says pedagogical processes should be child centric. Let the child be his own teacher and learner, and you turn into a facilitator. You're not a teacher anymore, you're a facilitator. CBSE says that to us. And it should be inclusive in nature as the focus is on individual achievement. Inclusive education is extremely important. A child is not faring well. How do I motivate the child individually in order to ensure that the child feels inclusive in the classroom and not let out or let down? The idea is to support students' ability to become an independent, self-reliant, and lifelong learner by using various interactive methods. We can't always be behind our students, forcing them to study something, because ultimately forcing something is not going to achieve it. We can't achieve anything by forcing somebody to do it. How can a child be an independent learner? How can he or she be self-reliant? The less he is dependent on me, the better he is to grow into a responsible and a holistic citizen. It should be a holistic development. How is that possible? How do we bring about these changes? These changes are not something that happens overnight. No, it will take its own time, but yes, eventually it will lead us to more responsible citizens with holistic and overall growth. That's what is expected. And pedagogies are teaching learning methodologies. In other words, pedagogy also should take care of individual differences of students, issues of social nature of learning, the community, the society, the environment in which the child is born and grows has a huge impact on the way he or she learns. So, yes, that has to be taken into consideration. And issues of social nature of learning and present challenges in a graded manner to make the learning child centered. So these are certain things that CBSE is asking us teachers to focus on. Sir Alroy, sir, you've raised your hand, sir. Please go ahead.
After this pandemic, it is highly difficult now.
Yes,
It is
sir.
quite challenging.
Not just
If,
after pandemic, it is challenging even before pandemic. So
before now, before
yes,
we
it
used to
is.
have a control towards them. But after this now, after this 1.5 year break, whatever
Hmm.
we give them and whatever we try to mold them also, after that only goes for a couple of days. Again, they are back to the pavilion at the same stage.
Understood,
And
sir.
their attitude and behavior is totally different when we go to deal with them. They look
So
at us
we
in a way that
yeah.
fine, fine, oh, okay, okay. It is only that they didn't tell us shut our mouth. Their attitude makes us understand.
Understood, sir. So, but we need to realize that we are not the only stakeholders of education. So,
I know.
education has multiple stakeholders: teachers, parents, society, management, school. We have a lot of stakeholders, and unless, and also the students, of course. And unless we all come together, this change is not going to happen. So, I agreed that actual teaching itself has become a challenge now, and it is not something that we can do overnight. So, one thing that I would recommend all of us as teachers, I'm a teacher as well. So, one thing that I would recommend all of us is to have a positive attitude towards this change. Let us believe that it is possible, so that we can go to students with attitude. When we have this thing that what, this is not going to happen, then we can't see that change in our students. And yes, agreed, there is different aspects in the society that is making the job of teaching even harder. I totally agree with you because I'm a teacher as well. And as I said, it is not an overnight change. It has to happen gradually, because even the question paper, the 10th standard last year, just that we just completed on 27th of April, not all questions were straightforward. So we had questions that expected students to understand the story and apply. We had questions like that. Like the Kodavus of Kur. They asked questions on about the Kodavus of Kur, which cannot be answered by students just by learning the or reading the story. They had to apply it. That is what CBSE is expecting from us. And if we want to train our students, we need to ask them questions like that. How were their behavior or customs contradictory? Now, a child wouldn't be able to answer the question just by reading the lesson. The Kodavus of Kur. How were their customs contradictory? A child will not be able to answer it if he just simply knows the lesson. He has to understand and think. Okay, one is their extreme bravery and courage. The other contradictory thing was their intense hospitality towards the other people. And this contradictory belief and the way their culture was so different from the basic Indian culture, because they had ancestry from both the Greek and the Arabs. So children have to understand, think, and analyze. Only then they could answer a question like that.
Janaki
So
ma'am, one
that
more.
is what.
Excuse me,
Yes, ma'am.
one more question was asked: why they were allowed to have guns? Why were they given guns also?
Yes, exactly, ma'am. You're absolutely right. So, these questions, sir, these are not our book back questions. They are questions that expect the children to think and then apply, analyze and then apply. And we as teachers, it's our responsibility to encourage children to think in these lines. Tiger in the Zoo poem. I was talking to few other teachers during the course of study discussion that happened last month. I was talking to a few teachers about it. Tiger in the Zoo, such a beautiful poem. But the kind of questions they ask, Why is the eye of the tiger compared to the stars in the sky? A child has to think and analyze. Is it the rage in the eyes of the tiger? Is it the loneliness in the eyes of the tiger? Is it the helplessness in the eyes of the tiger? What is it that the poet is comparing the eyes of a tiger to the stars in the sky? Why is it glittering? These are the kind of questions we have to start asking them, so that in the examination, when they are asked these questions, they don't panic. They don't think we don't know these answers. They shouldn't panic at it. So that is our intention. That is the intention of competency based education. That's what I'm trying to say. And it is not something that's going to happen overnight. Eventually, step by step. That's how it can be implemented. I hope I've answered your question. Yes, sir. It is hard, but I think it is doable.
No, it can be
I
done.
think it
It's
is
not that it
doable.
cannot be. What
Exactly.
now? At
That's
point
all
of
I
time,
want.
it leads to some kind of frustration. What is this? And we are
Yes,
putting so
sir.
much of hard
Yes.
work. That is what.
Change is always frustrating, sir. Change is always frustrating initially, but then eventually, when we realize that the change is for good, we will know that we will get accustomed to it. So change is always hard
Actually, it
at
makes
the initial time.
it hard for the child to understand that it is for its good.
Ah, true, true.
It takes
Agree,
time for him to understand. I just tell them that when you after some period of time you will realize what my
agree,
statement is.
agree, sir. Agree. Totally agree. Moving on to the, can I move on to the next one?
Yeah, ma'am.
Yeah. Sure. So moving on to the next aspect of CBE is assessment. So we looked at the objective, we looked at the content, we looked at our pedagogy, and now finally, after doing all this, if we don't assess the children, assessing the students is not for the benefit of the students alone, it is for the benefit of us as well. As teachers, we will know where we are standing after we get the assessment of our students. So when we assess the students and we assess their understanding and their knowledge, it is a check for us as well to know where we have gone wrong, where we have committed really well, done really well, and we can pat our backs, and where should we put in more effort. So assessment is not just a feedback for the students, but for uh, they are feedback for teachers as well. So assessment that measure the attainment of learning outcomes, the learning outcomes that we saw earlier, the tangible, measurable learning outcomes must be assessed in our assessments. And it involves objective as well as performance assessments. Objective assessments, as we all know, we had in term one MCQ based assessments, and then our internal assessments that we have, the speaking skills, the listening comprehension, the short answer responses. These are all objective assessment. And we also have performance assessment that focus on what the children can actually do with the knowledge they have gained. That is performance. The critical thinking, the effective psychomotor skills, the hand-eye coordination, all these comes under performance assessment. The assessment should also be wholesome. And coming to the LOs once again, LOs or learning outcomes are formal statements that tell us what a student is able to do after learning a given topic. LOs should be clear, concise statement of the skills that the student will be able to demonstrate after the instruction is over, after a particular chapter is over. What is the LO? LO should be observable, they should be tangible and clearly measurable and understood by all stakeholders. The LO should be understood by the teachers, the parents, the students, and anybody else. LOs delineate not only the cognitive achievement, but also life skills, the values, the life skill, the attitude of the students should also be, clearly stated by the learning outcome. Learning outcome provide opportunities for teachers. As I told you, the assessments and the learning outcomes are not just for the students, they are also for the teachers to reflect on the curriculum, on the way they have taught it, the context of teaching learning, what content we have created, the lesson plan we have created, the course of study that we have created. Is it really beneficial? Or are we just doing for the sake of doing it? Our LOs will give us a true, clear, concise picture of what we are doing over the academic year. Teachers need to use LOs as a tool for improving education and not just as an end in itself. So that is our yardstick. The competencies and the LOs that we have as our yardstick using which we improve our teaching learning skills. Now, these are some examples of learning outcomes identifies. say I have multiple poetic devices. Take a poem, Fire and Ice, or any other poem for that matter, Amanda, Animals, such beautiful poems we have. All the literary devices beyond the theme of the poem, we also have literary devices. Is a child able to understand that this particular thing is personification? When I call the tiger he, the child able to understand that the poet is trying to personify the tiger. When I say a pitter patter or tinkle, is a child able to understand snarl, growl? Is a child able to understand that these are onomatopic words? That is what we need to identify. These are all LOs. Comparing and contrasting. The two characters of, say, Lencho and Nelson Mandela, two different characters. Lencho has no belief on human beings. He thinks that human beings are crooks. And here is Nelson Mandela, who believes in humanity even after spending 30 years in jail. Are they able to compare and contrast the characters of these two characters in the story? This comparison contrasting, are they able to do it? Are the children able to do it? Interpreting the plot and the essence of a poem or a story. Ask questions in the class, explain it, read it with intonations, appreciate the beauty of a poem. For example, Dust of Snow is just two stanzas. It looks so simple, but the poem has such immense theme and beauty. Are the students able to appreciate that? That's important. Are they able to relate it to real life? Ma'am, I had children who said, Ma'am, I once had very bad time, and then my sister came and helped me. She helped me to, come over that, get over that difficulty. Are they able to relate it to our real life? Are they able to write meaningful and coherent passages? Are they able to communicate with their peer, discuss? These are all some learning outcome that we have to um, ensure children gain after the end of every lesson or poem. I think with that, we come to an end at the various important aspects that CBSE expects us teachers to introduce in our teaching learning pedagogies. Are we clear till this? If you have any questions, please raise your hands up. Anything that you have a concern or something, please do ask before we move on to the next important topic of today: how to improve the thinking skills of students. Any questions so far? Am I going in a proper pace? Am I going too fast? Am I clear? Please do tell me if it is okay, or shall I move on?
Yes, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. No doubt, ma'am.
Yeah,
You can
okay.
continue. Yes, ma'am.
And
Yes, ma'am. It's so
okay.
clear.
Any questions? Any questions? Do please either put it in the chat window, or you can always unmute yourself and ask. So, moving on to the next slide. Developing students' thinking skills. This is extremely important. As we told, it's not just the lower order thinking skills that we need to focus on. CBSE is not completely doing with it, but they are trying to say that reduce the LODs and focus more on the HODs, higher order thinking skill based questions.
There are certain things that you need to keep in mind while you are assessing a student's knowledge or understanding ability. First of all, question them with, there are certain kinds of questions that we can use. One is the explicit understanding kind of questions that have this what, identify, give reasons, describe the behavior, summarize the way the story ended, find the ways in which, say, find the various ways in which Oliver Lutkins fooled the lawyer throughout the story. These are all explicit understanding. Implicit understanding, comment on the naive nature of the lawyer, or suggest few ways in which the lawyer could have avoided being fooled. These are some, I'm taking the example of the hack driver from the supplementary book. I hope you all are aware of it. So say I take that example, comment on the naive nature, the gullible nature of the lawyer, or suggest ways in which the lawyer can avoid being, could have avoided being fooled. So these are the different ways in which I can test the implicit understanding. So these are the questions that I can ask. I'm just categorizing the questions into four major categories. Now that we all are, we all have come up with our questions. Each of the three groups, the members have all come up with your questions. So now you can categorize them. We have four categories. So you all can personally, individually, in your own notebook, you must have written the questions. So in your own notebook, you can categorize a question under these 4 categories. What is it under? Is it explicit understanding? Is it implicit understanding, where I'm testing whether the child has understood the nature of the characters or the theme of the story? And also, the third kind of category of question is writer's effect, literary or rhetorical devices. How does a poet convey, or how does the writer say? Say, take the example of the poem Animals. How does the poet show his the fact, his nature, his misanthropist nature? He is a misanthropist. The poet seems to absolutely loathe human beings. So, how does a poet show his nature of the hatred he has towards human beings? This is something that you can test the students if they have understood, to check whether they've understood the theme of the writer's viewpoint, or impact the writer had on the students. You can test them. That's the third category. And finally, a personal response. How do you think this could have been avoided? Evaluate the character sketch, explain how, or review this, or how would you end the story of Two Stories of Flying, the black aeroplane? Had you been the author, how would you end it? So these are my personal response kind of questions, where I'm letting the children encouraging the children to open their wings of creativity and write questions that test their creativity, answer questions that test their creativity. These are 4 broad categories of questions. You can, now that you have a list of questions, you can definitely assign next to each question, you can assign what category your question comes under. So moving on to the next questions. We ask next slide. We ask questions to find out what students know or have learned. However, questions can also be asked to encourage and develop students' thinking skills. These are an important aspect of competency-based education. I think many of you have asked questions that trigger the thinking skills of students, and that's extremely important. And this is important because that is what the rapidly changing world expects the students to know. And it's an important aspect of CBE, and one which in a rapidly changing world is also increasingly important. We all are aware of Bloom's taxonomy. Many of you would be implementing this while writing your lesson plan as well. The learning outcome that you write in lesson plan should be in accordance with Bloom's taxonomy. I'm sure you all are aware of it. Yesterday, I had also shared with you the pre-reading material, which had these aspects, the Bloom's taxonomy, from LOTs, remembering to creating higher order thinking skills. So with remembering as our skill, these are some concepts that we would ask them. Recall facts and basic concepts, like what was the activity that Ebright did after reading the book Travels of Monarch X. He was asked to do some activity by Urquhart, by Professor Urquhart. What was the activity? This is more on recalling the facts and the concept. So this comes under remembering. This is lower order thinking skill. And then we look at understanding. We explain the ideas or concepts. For example, describe, discuss, explain, identify, classify. These are our understanding abilities. I'm not saying don't ask questions based on that, but I would say limit your questions on understanding and application and focus more on analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Application is nothing but we apply the information that we get, use the information in new situation. For example, interpret, demonstrate, sketch, schedule, execute. These are certain verbs we use in accordance to application. And then as we go higher in the pyramid, we have the analysis part, where we draw connection between two ideas. This is what many of you had asked with two characters, clubbing two characters in a question. We draw the connection between two characters, compare and contrast, differentiate, distinguish, examine, relate them. So these are what we do. By doing this, we encourage the analysis skills, analyzing skills of students. The more you focus on such questions, the more children will be able to compare and contrast. And beyond that, we have evaluation and creation. Evaluating is coming to a conclusion, judging, giving your opinion. It should be opinionated, For example, the Q-based questions that we have in writing skill, the Q-based statistical analysis question, we give them a Q, a premise, and then we tell them, for example, a single-use plastic, SUP plastics. We had one question last year in sample CBSE question paper that said SUP plastics. Government has said that from year 2022, SUP plastics will be banned. What is your opinion? Write a argue on this or give your opinion on this statement. This is evaluation. This is what evaluation is. I give a clue, I give a statement, a premise, and I expect children to evaluate on it, either support or oppose. We always tell children whenever we have open-ended questions not to take a neutral stance. I'm sure you all would be doing that as well. You cannot say this is also possible or that is also possible. Both are possible according to it. Are zoos good or bad? Under tiger in the zoo, a child should either say yes, zoos are good because it helps in preserving endangered animals, or the child should say no, zoos are not good because they take away the freedom of the animals. Rather, animals can be kept in endangered animals can be kept in sanctuaries where they can live in a very their surroundings, something that is very similar to their natural habitat. So this sort of justifying their stance is what evaluation is all about. And that stands at the higher order of our Bloom's taxonomy pyramid. And beyond all that is creation. Creation stands at the top of the pyramid because it helps the students to understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and finally create. It requires the students to have all the below abilities and finally also do something on their own, creating their own answer, their own perspective. So construct something, design something, write conversations between two characters. All these come under creation, which is the topmost higher order thinking skill ability according to Bloom's taxonomy. So I wanted to be very clear on these Bloom's taxonomy because as teachers, we not only use this to set questions, but we also do this, use Bloom's taxonomy to create our lesson plans and the learning outcomes at the end of every chapter in our lesson plan. So as teachers, we have to be very comfortable with the various steps or the various aspects of our Bloom's taxonomy, the pyramid. Now, another task that you can do, maybe after the end of the session, before we start our next session tomorrow, it can be a part of your plenary activity. After session activity is look at the questions you've written and categorize them according to Bloom's taxonomy, whichever category it comes under, you can categorize it. Maybe tomorrow when we start the day, we can start the discussion of this and then we'll move on to day 2 session. LOTs and HOTs. Bloom's taxonomy is often described as running from LOT to HOT, but it's a very simplified version of looking at it. It is increasingly important that students develop the abilities to analyze, evaluate, create, and not just remembering and application. Now, CBSE doesn't say completely do away with it, reduce it. That's what CBSE says. These skills can be developed, but as I said in the beginning of the session, it takes time. It's not magic. We don't have magic wands. We teachers don't have magic wands. It takes time to, actually change the perspective from rote learning to, giving away the answers to children. After the end of every lesson, we dictate answers. Many schools, we do it. I recommend not to completely do away with dictating answers, but gradually, tell them, what, out of 8 questions, I give you 4 questions, you write 4 questions. Or I give you 5 questions, you write 3 questions. Gradually, influence them, tell them, encourage them that the more they write on their own, the better it is, especially when they face board examination. Because the questions we ask are not the questions that come in the exam. So that will help them gain confidence when they face the boards. These skills will definitely take time. It can be developed, but they take practice and time. We can help students to do this by asking questions that encourage them to use these skills. Not only after the lesson, but also during the classroom discussion, we can ask questions that encourage them. So if you can't remember all the, the terms that we just saw over here, there are a lot of terms that we just saw, right? All these things, design, assemble, define, duplicate. There are too many verbs that we see over here. You don't have to remember them all. Rather, you can just remember these things, few questions. Remember, understand, apply. We have questions that begin with identify, give, select, describe. And then we have analyze, which expect us to suggest few measures in which the lawyer could have avoided being fooled by Lolivel Atkins. Evaluate, argue, or explore. Argue the statement given by Walt Whitman that human beings are miserable and he can go back to and live with animals. Argue against it. I tell them to argue against it. They have to come up with answers that have to tell that humans are also good enough to live with. And it's not that animals are the best and humans are worse, like how Walt Whitman projects. He projects human beings to be the worst kind of creatures that are roaming on earth, and animals are way better. If I ask a question to students, argue this statement of Walt Whitman, they can start thinking on those lines. Is he right? Is he wrong? If I'm asking them to prove that he is wrong, they have to come up with these kind of answers. Explore, evaluate, make judgments. These all come under evaluation. And creation, summarizing, outlining. For example, how would you end the story Black Aeroplane? This will help them to think and write. These are all some questions I can ask in my say day-to-day class activities or even during examinations. These are some questions that I came up with, but of course many of you have come up with many wonderful questions, much better than these. These are some very few questions that I came up with. Why do you think this is, I think, from class 9? It's that lesson where the author ends in house is not a home, right? In supplementary, class 9. Why do you think the author's mother sent him to school the very next day of the fire accident? So why couldn't she wait for say 2-3 days until he settles down? Why did he push him to school the very next day? The children think on those lines. Why did the mother take that decision? Seemed to be very cruel to the author, but then the mother took it for some good reason. Why? Let them think. Analyze on the poet's intention in the lines and stares with his brilliant eyes at the brilliant stars. Evaluate why the poet uses the word should when he says the tiger should be snarling. Why the modal should? Why can't he say the tiger may be snarling or could be snarling? Why is he using the modal should? What is the intention of the poet when he uses the modal should? And few more detailed answer kind of questions. Imagine poet Walt Whitman meets Mandela. I talked about this to you all. Suggest 4 or 5 sets of conversation between them. See, this involves application and creation, higher order thinking skill. You can also give them, a simple example conversation to help them start. Starting problem is a universal problem across all students. So give them some examples so that they can start. And this actually motivates them. Humans are the worst of the creatures to roam on the surface of earth, Whitman says. Mandela says there is goodness in every human, and it is a lamp, or it is it's a flame, not a lamp, I'm sorry, it's a flame can hide but never extinguish. Let Mandela and Walt Whitman have this conversation. Children would love it. They'll come up with such amazing answers. And that's how we make them learners on their own, self-dependent and independent learners. That way we become facilitators, they become learners. Such sort of questions encourage them to get that interest to learn, rather than just reading the lesson, explaining the meanings of difficult words, writing the question answers. So boring and boredom, repeated, same things. Rather than that, when we ask such questions, it intrigues them, it triggers their interest. Another question is, the secret to gaining the upper hand in negotiation is to give the other side the illusion of control. It's a quote said by Christopher Voss. And ask them, is it true with respect to Gerard and the intruder? In class 9, we had this. If I may use the last chapter in class 9, where Gerard actually pretends to be worried and scared of the intruder. The intruder has a gun with him. But the entire scene, the entire time, it was Gerard who had an upper hand. He didn't let the intruder realize it. He acted as though the intruder was the one who was controlling the conversation. But genuinely, that was not the case. It was Gerard who was controlling the conversation. So relate it to this quote and write an answer. Explain the story. So these sort of questions, trigger children to think. These are some questions that I could come up with. So with this, we have another 2 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes. So we'll wind up today's session with this. Just think on these sort of questions that we can ask students. What more? These are some examples that I'm giving you. Please get into the aspect of asking such sort of questions to children. Higher order thinking skills. That is something that I would recommend and request all your teachers to do.